As far as role models, I think, there's obviously some of the obvious role models. I think Edison was certainly a role model, probably one of the biggest role models.
Did you study Edison's life? Or?
Yeah, I read books about him, absolutely. And it's an interesting contrast, like Edison versus Tesla, because interesting, the car company is called Tesla. And the reason it's called Tesla is because we use an AC induction motor, which is an architecture that Tesla developed. And the guy probably deserves a little more play than he gets in current society. But on balance, I'm a bigger fan of Edison than Tesla, because Edison brought his stuff to market and made those inventions accessible to the world, whereas Tesla didn't really do that.
Right.
So he'd certainly be a big one. I think the great technologists, Steve Jobs at Apple, Bill Gates. I actually thought Disney was a pretty good innovator.
Steve Jobs was and is a wonderful Silicon Valley icon. Is he someone that you've admired, and what have you learned from Steve's life and work?
Well, he's certainly someone I've admired. Although I did try to talk to him once at a party, and he was super rude to me. But I don't think it was me. I think it was sort of, off the course.
I think you weren't the first.
Yeah, not the first. No, it wasn't. Yeah, and I was actually there with Larry Page is an old friend of mine. I've known Larry since before he got venture funding for Google, and Larry was the guy that introduced me to Steve Jobs. So it's not as like I'm going and tugging on his coat, please talk to me. But so I was introduced by Larry Page. It's not bad. So. He obviously was an incredible guy and made fantastic products. And I don't know, there was like a certain the guy had a certain magic about him. Just sort of that was really inspiring. So I think that's really great.
Is there that magic that you try and emulate?
No, I think Steve Jobs is way cooler than I am. So how would I describe myself? Well, I seem to have a high innate drive, and that's been true even since I was a little kid. I really had a very strong drive. I care a lot about the truth of things, and trying to understand the truth of things. I think that's important. If you're going to come up with some solution, then the truth is really, really important, I think. I try to think of. It's difficult to obviously come up with things that are praise for oneself, or there's bad and good here, but I think sometimes they're just the things that seem quite clear and obvious to me, and I don't understand why they aren't so obvious to everyone.
So would you describe yourself as fearless?
I wouldn't say I'm fearless. In fact, I think I feel fear quite strongly. But if what we're doing is what I'm doing is I think is important enough, then I just override the fear.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's not as though I feel it more strongly than I would like. But essentially, I just drive overrides fear. But I feel the fear. It's kind of annoying. I wish I didn't.
Okay.
I wish I felt it less.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah. All these introspective questions are interesting. I don't get asked these very often.
When your friends came or your family came up to you and said, "Look, there's nations that can't do this. You're a guy, but you have some resources." What did you say, or do, or think?
Well, so. I had a lot of friends of mine try to talk me out of starting a rocket company because they thought it was crazy. And one friend of mine made me watch a video of rockets blowing up. And there were just lots of people that thought it was a really crazy idea. And there was some people that had tried to start rocket companies, not succeeded. And they tried to talk me out of it. And but the thing is that the premise for talking me out of it was, well, we think you're going to lose the money that you invest. And I was like, well, that was my expectation anyway.
Right.
So I don't really mind if I lose. I mean, I'd mind, but I mean, it's not like I was trying to figure out the rank-ordered best way to invest money, and on that basis, chose space.
Right.
It's not like that's. I thought, wow.
You weren't looking at like money market bonds, AAA bonds,
right, exactly.
rocket company.
Like
you weren't like
do real estate.
Yeah,
invest in shoemaking, anything. And whoa, space is highest ROI. That is not what that wasn't the premise. I just thought that it was important that humanity expand beyond Earth, and we weren't doing that. So maybe there was something I could do to kind of spur that on. And then I was able to compress the costs of the spacecraft and everything down to a relatively manageable number, and I got stuck on the rocket. The U.S. rockets were way too expensive. I ended up going to Russia, flew to Russia 3 times to negotiate purchase of an ICBM. I tried to buy 2 of the biggest ICBMs in the Russian fleet in 2001 and 2002. And I actually negotiated a price.
I'll just let that statement stand. I'm not even going to.
I mean, that's.
Well, actually, I have to. Like, who did you call? No, I mean,
you open the yellow pages.
Yeah,
go to
I'm in the market.
ICBMs.
I mean, how does this? I mean, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but I am curious. Just this one particular thing. You decided at some point you need to buy an ICBM. Yeah.
Well, actually, at first I tried to buy just a normal launch vehicle that they used to launch satellites.
Right.
Those were too expensive.
I see. I see.
The Boeing Delta II would have cost $65 million each, and so 2 would have been 130, and then I was like, whoa, okay, that breaks my budget right there.
Yeah.
If you say, what is a rocket made of? And say, okay, it's made of aluminum, titanium, some copper, carbon fiber if you want to go that direction. And you can break down and say, what is the raw material cost of all these components? And if you have them stacked on the floor and could wave a magic wand so that the cost of rearranging the atoms was 0, then what would the cost of the rocket be?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, okay, it's really small. It's like, 2% of what a rocket costs.
Right.
So clearly be in how the atoms are arranged.
Right.
The other, so you got to figure out sort of, okay, how can we get the atoms in the right shape much more efficiently?
Yeah.
And so I had a series of meetings on Saturdays with people that were some of whom were working at the big aerospace companies, just to try to figure out, is there some catch here that I'm not appreciating? And I couldn't figure out. There didn't seem to be any catch, so started SpaceX.
I'm quite a big fan of tunnels. Tunnels are so underappreciated.
Please elaborate.
Well, the fundamental problem with cities is that we build cities in 3D.
Yeah.
I mean, you see you've got these tall buildings with lots of people on each floor, but then you've got roads which are 2D.
Yeah.
So that obviously just doesn't work. You're guaranteed to have gridlock. But you can go 3D if you have tunnels. And you can have many tunnels crisscrossing each other with maybe a few meters vertical distance between them, and completely get rid of traffic problems. And it's my understanding that actually Hong Kong is in the process of building some tunnels, and I was very pleased to hear that. But that really is the solution for solving traffic in major cities.
Yeah. You can also go 3D with flying cars.
You can.
But that's not going to happen for a long time.
Well, I mean, flying cars sound cool, but then they do make a lot of wind, and they're kind of noisy, and
you've thought this out.
The probability of something falling on your head is much higher.
Yeah.
Maybe we're in a simulation right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. Sometimes it feels like that. Yeah, I mean, I think it is going to, from what I've heard of Oculus Rift and some of the other sort of immersive technologies, that it's quite transformative. You really feel like you're there. And then when you come out of it, it feels like reality isn't real. So I think we'll see probably less physical movement in the future as a result of the virtual reality stuff. Yeah.
And when we come out of what we're here now into this virtual reality, we'll think it's real. I mean, it's like we're...
Well, I mean, there's some interesting things here on the virtual reality front. I mean, just on the whole notion of a simulation, which is that if you extrapolate into the future and say, well, how good, let's say, will video games be in 100 or 200 or 1,000 years from now? If there's continued improvement, and you're in a full body haptic suit with a sort of surround vision, and it becomes, beyond a certain resolution, indistinguishable from reality. And there are likely to be millions, maybe billions of such simulations. So then, what are the odds that we're actually in base reality? Isn't it 1 in billions?
Is it? I mean, I can give the counter argument, but I'd rather you give the counter argument.
Obviously, this feels real, but it seems unlikely to be real.
Something that I think people may be only beginning to look at is establishing some kind of brain-computer interface.
A brain-computer interface.
Yeah, at the neuron level. So this is sort of intelligence augmentation as opposed to artificial intelligence.
Right.
And I think that has a lot of potential.
You mentioned to me yesterday. I really had kind of no idea what you were talking about, and then I looked up Ian Banks. Neural lace.
Neural lace.
That's right.
Exactly.
And so it's this concept of wiring the brain. So it's either there could be a brain internet, and it could also mean that we can upload our thoughts to the cloud.
You would never forget anything. You wouldn't need to take photographs.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's incredible. I mean, you would never forget anything. You would expand your ability to process information, to remember information, right? But then when the denial of service attack happens,
you gotta watch out for hacking. That could really be awkward.
Watch out for that. But also, and then I read it can also be used to fight degenerative diseases like Parkinson's too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it actually would be quite an equalizer as well, because I think the delta between it would sort of even things out. I think.
You mean in humankind?
Yeah,
people
yeah.
there would be no education disadvantage. Everyone would be starting at the same level.
Yeah.
So there would be no meritocracy. No, there would be new meritocracy.
There would be, but it would be the differences would be smaller. The delta would be smaller, probably.
Wow, and you really welcome that kind of world.
All right, welcome. You asked for predictions.
Okay.
Predictions are not the same as preferences. So, I mean, do I think something like that is likely to occur? I think probably.
Wow.
Yeah.
But Flight 4 was flawless. In Musk's world, it lit the darkness. Then, as often, the week of Christmas became a time when little boy dreams are answered.
NASA called and told us that we'd won a $1.5 billion contract. And I couldn't even hold the phone. It's like, I just blurted out, I love you guys.
They saved you.
Yeah, they did.
Financially and maybe even emotionally.
I'll tell you what, that was definitely helpful. Yeah.
2 days later, on Christmas Eve, Tesla's investors decided to pour in more money. So you were saved in the period of 3 days.
Yeah.
By two completely unexpected events.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely. That's for sure.
A liftoff of the Falcon 9. The rockets haven't failed since. His cargo capsule has docked 3 times with the space station.
Capture is confirmed.
And in the California plant, they're fitting seats for what they hope will be eventual manned missions. SpaceX is also testing a rocket that can be reused, softly landing on a column of flame. Another step on a longer journey.
You think there is some kind of destiny involved in this, or is it just physics?
Well, do I think that there's some sort of master intelligence architecting all of this stuff? I think probably not, because then you have to say, where did the master intelligence come from? So you have it sort of begs the question of, you know, So I think really you can explain this with the fundamental laws of physics. You know, it's a complex phenomenon from simple elements.
So that's when I decided to start a rocket company. And I actually didn't think it would succeed. And it almost didn't. So we started off developing a small rocket, which was kind of a scale model version. It was about 100,000 pounds of thrust, so big, you know, big by normal standards, but small for a rocket. And developed the engine and the airframe and the electronics and the guidance and control system, and then proceeded to have 3 failed launches in a row. So this is 2008, and so we were heading into the recession, and we had 1 rocket left, and unfortunately in late 2008 that 4th launch did work, and we made it to orbit, and then we won a NASA contract after that, and so fortunately things worked out. But if that 4th launch had not worked, then SpaceX wouldn't be around. So it was a very close call. In fact, when I started, I thought, okay, I've got enough money. I think I've got enough money for 3 launches. Unfortunately, it was just enough to make that 4th one.